I woke up at 5, made coffee, and set 2 mugs on the table like I had done for years, and when Monica sat down, she slid a manila envelope across the wood and said she was filing for divorce. I opened it and read the petition line by line, checked the filing date, and saw her signature already notarized, and while I read, her phone lit up twice with the same name, Evan. I asked if there was anything we needed to discuss about money, the house, or the timeline, and she said her attorney would handle everything and that she had already moved some items to a storage unit. I told her I would not argue in the kitchen and that I would review the papers with counsel before I signed anything, and she said that was fine because she was meeting someone for lunch to talk through next steps. I put the papers back in the envelope, rinsed my mug, and grabbed my work bag, and when I turned to leave, she said she hoped we could keep it mature to avoid embarrassment, and I told her maturity would not be a problem. On the way out, her phone lit again with a preview of a message that read, "We're good for noon," and the contact said Evan R., and I did not say a word about it because there was nothing to debate. In the garage, I sat in the car for a minute and made a short list in a notebook, called Jamal, pull pay stubs, inventory joint accounts, confirm house title, and then I drove to work. I clocked in at the logistics office at 7:20, walked the dock, and signed off on a delivery exception report. At my desk, a bid packet from Rourke Supply had arrived overnight with prices that undercut the field by cents in a way that was familiar to me, not because I could prove anything in that moment, but because I recognized phrases in the summary that sounded like our internal drafts from last week. I flagged the file and sent a note to our compliance director, Renee, to set a review meeting for the afternoon, and I attached the 2 most recent Rourke proposals plus our internal spec template. Then I called Jamal and said I needed 40 minutes after work to review a divorce petition and ask a few questions about vendor confidentiality and communication boundaries, and he said he was open at 6. At 11:30, Monica texted me a courtesy note that she had forwarded a few utility logins I might need, and I wrote back received, and left it at that. At noon, I ate at my desk, opened the Rourke files again, and started a list of sentence matches to check against our drafts. This was not a day for speeches. It was a day for steps. Before everything fell apart, my life was measured in quiet routines that gave each day shape and order. I had worked in logistics since I was 22, warehouse floor, dispatcher, operations lead, then director. I liked systems that could be counted, verified, and signed. Freight didn't lie. It either arrived or it didn't. Every truck, every manifest, every signature had a time and a trace. I built my life that way. Straight lines, no shortcuts. I lived in a modest 3-bedroom house in a suburb outside Atlanta, a place with trimmed hedges, familiar mail routes, and neighbors who waved without expecting conversation. The house wasn't fancy, but it was paid down far enough that I slept well. The yard was my weekend rhythm: mow on Saturday morning, edge before lunch, sweep the driveway after the sun dropped behind the oak trees. I kept my tools lined up by size in the shed, a small thing, but it helped me think straight. I was a man who liked to see that everything had a place. Monica came into my life 15 years ago. She was younger, lively, sharp with numbers. When we met, she worked in accounting at a distribution firm we did business with. Back then, she laughed easily, asked questions about routes and contracts, seemed genuinely interested in my work. I wasn't flashy or charming, but she said she liked that I was consistent, the kind of man who shows up, as she used to put it. For a long time, I believed that was enough. In the early years of our marriage, she helped me manage finances, planned vacations, and handled the social side of our lives. She was comfortable where I was simple. I didn't question it much. I thought that division of energy made us work well together. Over time, though, that balance shifted. As I grew quieter, she grew busier, more focused on her job, on promotions, on networking events I was often too tired to attend. She said I didn't understand the new corporate culture. Maybe I didn't. I was raised to keep your head down and let your work speak. She preferred to be seen, to build momentum through people. We started moving in different directions under the same roof. Most mornings, I left the house at 6 and returned a little before 6. Dinner was once shared, her cooking or mine, but by the last year, it turned into 2 separate routines. I'd come home, heat leftovers, eat at the counter. She'd come in later, eat salad or order delivery, often with her laptop open beside her. The TV filled the silence. I noticed she started dressing sharper for work, new suits, polished shoes, new perfume. When I asked, she said, "I'm in meetings all day, presentation matters." I agreed. It was true. I just didn't recognize the tone in her voice anymore, polite, distant, like a client relationship that had run its course. I wasn't blind to the tension, but I didn't believe it was fatal. Marriage had its cycles. You weather the quiet spells, give space, wait for things to settle. That's what I thought I was doing, waiting for balance to return. The idea that she was already preparing her exit never crossed my mind. I figured she was under pressure at work. Rourke Supply, her employer, was in the middle of expanding, and she had been pushing to become part of their leadership circle. She said her boss, Evan Rourke, believed in her potential. I had never met him, only heard his name. I told her to stay professional and stay steady, like I told every younger worker I mentored. She smiled and said, "Don't worry, Calvin, I know how to handle myself." Weekends used to be our time. We'd drive to Stone Mountain, walk the trails, grab lunch, and talk about everything but work. In the last year, weekends became extensions of her job. Client dinners, off-site strategy sessions, industry networking brunches. I stayed home, cut the grass, watched the game, or worked through pending freight reports. My friends sometimes teased me for living too predictably, but predictability kept my life steady. I didn't chase excitement. I chased peace. At work, I managed a team of 40. We handled regional contracts for freight distribution, mostly mid-sized manufacturing clients. My company had a strict code for vendor bidding. Every proposal had to be sealed until review day. Everything was timestamped, cross-checked, logged. If a vendor undercut competitors repeatedly by margins too small to be coincidence, we took a closer look. My team prided itself on fair process. That's why, when Rourke Supply started sweeping bids with uncanny precision, I took notice. They always came in just under the second lowest bidder, down to decimals that matched our internal cost projections. It was too precise to be luck. I filed it away, thinking it might just be aggressive pricing. I had no reason yet to connect that company to my home. At church, Pastor will often said, "Peace without vigilance turns into sleep." I thought about that sometimes when sitting alone in the pew, watching couples hold hands during service. I wasn't naive, but I believed that decency protected you, that if you lived clean, kept your word, didn't chase trouble, then trouble would stay on its side of the line. I learned later that's not how it works. Trouble doesn't ask permission. Around this time, my friend Jamal, who had gone to law school with my cousin, joined our weekly breakfast routine. He had practiced law for decades, mostly corporate compliance and civil cases. We'd meet on Fridays before work, talk about current events, faith, and aging. Jamal often said that life rewards patience but only when paired with clarity. I told him patience was my only weapon left, and he laughed. "Then make sure you sharpen it," he said. I didn't know how true that would become. The last stable month before the divorce, Monica's demeanor shifted again. She came home late, distracted, always on her phone. She started using phrases she never used before, like partnership synergy and executive alignment. I didn't question it, but I noticed. One night she mentioned an upcoming corporate retreat in Savannah that sounded more social than strategic. I said it might be good to get some rest between projects. She smiled faintly and said, "It's not that kind of retreat." I didn't ask what kind. Maybe I should have. Still, I tried to hold the structure steady. Bills paid, car maintained, church tithe on time. That was my way of showing love, reliability, protection, presence. It wasn't dramatic, but it was solid. Some men express affection with words. I did it with consistency. I never missed her birthday, never forgot an anniversary, even when she stopped celebrating them. When her mother got sick, I drove to the hospital every evening for 2 weeks while she stayed late at work. I thought she appreciated that, but she treated it like something ordinary, expected. Eventually, I stopped bringing it up. We didn't argue much, but we didn't talk much either. The distance grew in small, polite increments. I could tell she was measuring her words, as if every conversation was an interview she wanted to end. I didn't realize she had already chosen another direction. Looking back, I can see the signs clearly: the new phone password, the late-night text pings, the sudden concern about joint accounts and financial autonomy. At the time, I brushed it off as independence. She said she was tired of depending on anyone. I told her independence doesn't have to mean separation. She didn't answer. At work, I stayed focused. Freight never lies. Numbers tell their own story. I found comfort in that. My crew respected me because I was fair. When a driver made a mistake, I corrected it quietly, didn't embarrass him in front of others. That's the kind of leadership I believed in, correction with dignity. It's how I ran my marriage too, or at least tried to. But marriage isn't a warehouse. You can't track loyalty through barcodes. You find out the truth only when the shipment goes missing. On weekends, I'd sit on the porch, drink coffee, and watch neighbors walk their dogs. Life looked normal. Kids rode bikes, someone grilled burgers down the street, and the air smelled like cedar mulch. But the peace I felt wasn't full. It was thin, like a coat of paint over what's starting to rot. I sensed something coming. I just didn't know it would arrive at my breakfast table in an envelope. The night before that morning, Monica had worked late again. I stayed up until 11, then went to bed. She came in quietly after midnight. I pretended to be asleep. In the dark, I heard the sound of her phone buzzing once, then again, and her voice whispering low, not playful, but serious. She said, "Tomorrow's fine." It's settled. I didn't move. I thought maybe it was work. But when she placed her phone down, I saw the glow of a message screen reflected in the mirror, and a man's name, Evan. The same one that would appear again the next morning on her phone while she handed me the divorce papers. That's what made the moment clear later that day at work when I opened the work bid proposal and saw lines lifted directly from our internal documents. She hadn't just left me emotionally, she had carried pieces of my professional life into another man's hands. I didn't know the full picture yet, but I understood one thing: silence was no longer protection. It was strategy. And from that point on, I treated every detail like evidence, not for revenge, but for order. When life falls apart, order is what keeps you from breaking with it. I didn't call her that afternoon or ask questions. I finished my shift, kept notes, and went home to an empty house that smelled faintly of her perfume. I ate leftovers standing at the counter, wrote a few things in my notebook, and checked the front door locks before turning off the lights. I knew that by the next morning, everything that once felt stable would need to be reevaluated: the marriage, the home, the work relationships. But for that night, I just sat in the quiet, letting the hum of the refrigerator fill the room, and told myself one last truth: nothing collapses overnight. It's been cracking for a while. You just finally hear it. The first clue wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a confession or a fight. It was a pattern, quiet, consistent, and mathematical. At work, I started noticing the same name appearing too often on winning vendor lists: Rourke Supply Group. They had only been in our system for 6 months, yet they were suddenly taking half the regional contracts. I reviewed the bids, line by line. Each time, they undercut the nearest competitor by just enough to win, sometimes by a margin of 27 cents on a $50,000 order. That's not coincidence. That's data access. I didn't say anything to my team. I just began collecting copies. Every bid, every timestamp, every internal draft I could access. My company's protocol required sealed bidding, meaning no vendor could see another's numbers until after approval. I had signed off on that process myself for over a decade. The only people who could have leaked details were those in our accounting or administrative departments, people with clearance. My wife was one of them, but for a different company. That connection didn't make sense yet. I had no proof of her involvement, no reason to tie Monica to anything professional. I just knew something didn't add up. That week, she started spending more time working remotely. She said her office was renovating, so she preferred to work from cafes and hotel lounges where it was quieter. I came home one evening to find her at the dining table, laptop open, surrounded by color-coded folders and spreadsheets. I asked what she was working on, and she said, quarterly projections. Nothing you'd care about. Her tone was casual, but her screen showed a company logo I recognized, Rourke Supply Group. That was the first time the name crossed from my desk to my home. I didn't confront her. Instead, I watched patterns. At dinner that night, she talked about a potential promotion, something about client integration. I congratulated her, and she said Evan had mentioned she might oversee a new expansion project. I asked if it was the same Evan whose name kept lighting up her phone. She froze for a second, then said, "You really need to stop reading into things." I didn't push. I'd learned that silence unsettled her more than arguments. The next morning, she left early, saying she had a breakfast meeting. I looked out the window as she backed out of the driveway, noticed her phone was connected to the car's Bluetooth, and saw a contact flash on the dashboard screen before she pulled away, Evan R. That night, after work, I came home and printed 2 Rourke bid packets for comparison. I highlighted phrases that matched our internal templates, phrases that no outside vendor should ever have access to. I kept the papers in a plain folder marked Doc Reports and locked them in my filing cabinet. At work, I asked Renee, our compliance director, about the vendor confidentiality system. I told her I'd seen some patterns worth reviewing. She said she'd noticed similar anomalies but hadn't found a leak. If someone's copying your templates, she said, it's internal. Or someone close to internal. Her tone carried weight. I told her I'd dig further and document everything before raising a flag. Meanwhile, Monica's behavior at home became oddly formal, as if she were already living alone. She'd moved some clothes to her office for convenience. The fridge held half the groceries it used to. She spoke in phrases that sounded rehearsed. Let's keep things civil. I just need to find peace. We both deserve different kinds of fulfillment. I recognized those lines from the self-help blogs she used to read on her phone. One Friday night, I came home from work and found an unfamiliar scent in the hallway, cologne that wasn't mine. She said a colleague had stopped by to drop off files. The air in the house felt too still after that. I went into the garage and sat for an hour, notebook open, just writing down what I knew. Monica works for Rourke Supply. Rourke keeps winning bids from my company. Rourke's proposals match internal documents. Monica has direct access to my home computer and sometimes uses my printer. Her boss, Evan, communicates with her at all hours. That list was enough to make me pause. I still didn't want to believe it was coordinated, affair and corporate theft, but both were heading in the same direction. The next morning, I tested a theory. I emailed a dummy bid draft to myself at work with an intentional typo in a pricing section, something subtle but traceable. 2 days later, the new Rourke proposal contained the same typo, corrected but visible in the metadata. That was the confirmation. The leak was real. I printed both documents, slipped them into my folder, and said nothing. That Sunday, I sat through church next to Monica. She smiled politely at people but never once looked at me. When Pastor Will spoke about honesty in unseen places, she shifted in her seat. After the service, she said she was heading to brunch with colleagues and asked if I could handle grocery shopping. I nodded. When she left, I stayed in the car for a few minutes, thinking about how easily people create second lives. Not through grand lies, but through 1,000 small omissions, missed calls, guarded words, unexplained time. At home, I logged onto our shared tablet. Her email app was still synced from before. I didn't dig far, just checked the sent folder. There it was, an attachment sent to evan.rourke@riskglobalpartners.com with the subject line "Use this format, it scores well." The file name was identical to the internal bid form I had drafted the previous week. That was enough. I printed it, dated it, and put it in the same folder with the others. That night, I didn't sleep much. I wasn't angry, just alert. I had crossed from suspicion to confirmation. Now everything had to be documented cleanly. I wasn't going to shout, accuse, or beg. I was going to follow the same process I used at work when freight went missing: verify, log, report. The next morning, I called Jamal and asked if he had time that week to discuss contract integrity issues. He said, "You mean at work or at home?" I said, "Both, probably." He told me to bring every piece of evidence I had, and we'd sort it quietly. At the office, I sent a short message to Renee: "I have confirmed document leakage. We'll prepare a full trace with proof. Please keep this confidential until I can meet." She replied within minutes, "Understood. I'll schedule after hours." That evening, Monica came home later than usual. She was dressed sharp, makeup perfect, hairstyled. She said she'd had dinner with her team. I asked which team. She hesitated, then said, "Work people." I nodded and said nothing more. She poured a glass of wine, scrolled through her phone, and hummed softly to herself like she'd had a good night. I wanted to ask who paid for that dinner, but I already knew. Before bed, she said she was visiting her sister next weekend to clear her head. I said, "Do what you need." She looked surprised by how calm I was. That was fine. Calm worked in my favor. By then, I had everything I needed: timestamped documents, email chains, matching phrasing, and the list of bid anomalies. I didn't want to destroy her, but I also wasn't going to protect wrongdoing. I'd spent too many years preaching honesty to the young guys at work to abandon it now. 2 days later, Renee confirmed an after-hours meeting. I brought the folder, laid it out piece by piece, and explained the sequence: internal drafts, email evidence, vendor matches. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she said, "This could turn into a full-scale investigation." I said, "It should." As I drove home that night, I thought about how strange it was to live 2 lives at once, one crumbling, one stabilizing. My marriage was dissolving, but my sense of clarity was sharpening. I got home around 9. The house was dark. On the kitchen counter sat a half-empty wine bottle and a note: "Let's try to keep this divorce simple." I folded it, placed it under the envelope she'd given me days earlier, and turned off the lights. At that point, I wasn't wondering if she was guilty, just how far she'd gone. And I already knew I wouldn't need to raise my voice to find out. When truth finally lands, it doesn't knock first. It just appears, complete, undeniable, and often at the moment you've stopped looking for confirmation. 3 days after my meeting with Renee, I came home from work and found Monica sitting at the dining table with her laptop open, surrounded by printouts. She didn't notice me right away. She was on a video call, smiling, using a tone I'd never heard her use with me in years: soft, warm, eager to please. She said, "Yes, I already forwarded Calvin's template. He won't even notice. It's just formatting, not data." The name on the corner of her screen read Evan Rourke. I stood in the hallway for maybe 10 seconds. It was long enough to hear him laugh through the speakers and say, "You're saving me again." She said, "That's what I do." She didn't see me until she closed the call. When she turned and noticed me, her smile dropped immediately. "How long have you been standing there?" she asked. "Long enough," I said. "Long enough to know exactly what's been going on." Her face tightened, but she tried to play it off. "You're overreacting, Calvin. It's just business templates. Everyone in this industry shares materials." "That's a lie," I said calmly. "Those templates are proprietary. You know that because you signed the confidentiality clause yourself when I helped you apply for your job." She crossed her arms. "You're not my manager." "No," I said. "I'm just a man whose work you've been leaking to your lover so his company could win bids against mine." Her eyes flickered. That was the moment of recognition, the point where denial wasn't worth it. She knew I had proof. She didn't ask how. She just looked down at her screen, closed it, and said, "You don't understand what this is. Evan believes in me. He's helping me move up. He's giving me a chance to lead something real. You call that leadership?" I asked. Copying documents? Sleeping with your boss to feed him my company's contracts? She flinched but didn't deny it. She said, "You think too small, Calvin. You've been doing the same job for 30 years and calling it pride. I'm trying to get somewhere." I didn't raise my voice. I'd learned a long time ago that shouting only clouds the record. I said, "You already got somewhere. You got caught." She turned defensive. "You don't know what you're talking about. None of this can be traced to me." I reached into my work bag and placed a folder on the table. "Everything can be traced. This folder holds every email you sent from our home tablet, every document you forwarded, and every timestamp that connects you to Evan's files. If you think deleting your sent mail clears your name, you should talk to an IT auditor. Metadata doesn't lie." Her face drained of color. "You went through my emails?" "I went through our shared device," I said. "You used it to send confidential files from my account network. That made it my problem too." She stood up, pacing. "You can't just invade my privacy." I stayed seated. "You forfeited privacy when you turned our house into your office for corporate theft. You wanted to use my work as leverage for your next promotion. Now you've got a different kind of attention coming your way." She covered her face with both hands and muttered, "You wouldn't." "I already did," I said quietly. "The compliance team has your emails, the audit logs, and the Rourke proposals. They'll handle it from here. I'm out of it." She looked up sharply. "You reported me?" "I reported what I found," I said. "It wasn't about you. It was about protecting the integrity of my work and the people who trust me to run that department honestly. You made your choices. Now you live with them." She stared at me for a long time. I could see the gears turning, trying to find a way to manipulate the situation, but there was none left. The documents spoke for themselves. Finally, she said, "You just destroyed my career." I shook my head. "You did that yourself. I just stopped being your cover." She sank into the chair, silent. For a few minutes, neither of us said a word. The air felt heavy, still. Then she whispered, "So what happens now?" "An investigation," I said. "Maybe charges, maybe termination. Depends on what your company decides. As for us, we're done. You already filed the divorce papers. I'll sign them once my attorney confirms everything is documented and clear." She looked like she might cry but stopped herself. Instead, she said something that stuck with me. "You always cared more about rules than people." I answered, "No. I cared about truth. People just stopped caring about that." I stood, gathered the folder, and went upstairs to pack a small overnight bag. I didn't need the whole house that night. I needed space. Before I left, I told her, "Don't contact me. Everything you say from here on will go through the attorneys." She didn't argue. She just stared at the table, motionless. I spent that night at Jamal's guest house. When I told him everything, he listened without interrupting, then said, "Good. You stayed calm. That's how you win when emotion is a weapon against you." He called a friend in corporate law and helped prepare a summary memo for my company's counsel, confirming the timeline of evidence. Jamal said the board would likely suspend all contracts with Rourke Supply immediately, pending investigation. That meant Evan's empire was about to collapse. He poured 2 glasses of water and said, "You don't need revenge. The truth is already doing the work for you." He was right. The next morning, I went to the office early. The building was quiet. Renee was already there. She handed me a sealed envelope labeled confidential. Inside was a formal notice: Rourke Supply under internal investigation, vendor relationship suspended, pending legal review. Attached was a letter of thanks from senior management for alert and ethical action in identifying breaches of confidentiality. That's all I needed. Not applause, not vindication, just acknowledgement that the facts were seen. By noon, the news reached Monica's company. I didn't know how they found out so fast, but word spreads quickly when legal departments start calling each other. Around 3, I got a text from her, "We need to talk." I didn't respond. She called once, I ignored it. At 6, while I was packing up, Renee stopped by my office and said, "They suspended both of them, Evan Rourke and your wife. Full review pending. They may face criminal exposure if financial damage is proven." I thanked her for letting me know. Driving home that evening, the silence in the car felt different. Not heavy, just settled. Like a decision that no longer needed revisiting. When I arrived, Monica was waiting outside on the porch. Her eyes were red, makeup faded. I parked, stepped out, and said nothing. She spoke first. "They fired me. Effective immediately." "I know," I said. She wiped her eyes. "Evan's gone too. He won't answer my calls. They froze his accounts, his phone, everything. I figured they would." She looked at me, desperate. "You don't understand, Calvin. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I just wanted to prove I could be more than somebody's wife." "You could have done that without breaking trust," I said. "You didn't need to cross lines. You chose to." She stepped closer. "Can't we fix this? Maybe you could tell your company I didn't know what I was doing?" "No," I said simply. "That wouldn't be true." Her lip trembled. "Please, Calvin. I'll lose everything." "You already did," I said. I walked past her, unlocked the door, and went inside. I didn't slam it. I just closed it firmly. Upstairs, I sat on the bed we once shared, looked around at a space that now felt like evidence of another life. Her perfume bottles, her framed diplomas, the photo from our wedding that still sat on the dresser. I didn't feel rage. Just a steady emptiness that comes when all the pieces finally make sense. I spent the next hour going through my personal documents, sorting what to keep and what to box. Divorce paperwork, property title, insurance records. Everything went into labeled envelopes. I'd built my career on order. I wasn't about to stop now. Later that night, as I was packing a box of books, I found a note tucked inside one of them. It was in her handwriting. "I know you'll never forgive me, but I had to try something different." I folded the note and placed it in the trash. The next morning, I called Jamal and told him to proceed with the divorce response. We filed a counterpetition citing misconduct and breach of marital trust. He said it would likely finalize within 6 weeks, no contest, given the investigation. The following week, the corporate audit team issued its report. It confirmed what I already knew. Confidential data had been accessed through Monica's home logging credentials and forwarded to Rourke Supply. The company issued a formal statement ending all relationships with that vendor. Evan's firm collapsed within days. His investors pulled out, his assets were frozen, and news articles began to circulate about contract irregularities. Monica's name was mentioned once, buried in a footnote as a junior accounting participant under review. She lost her reputation, but the world moved on quickly. That's how it goes. No one remembers the small players in a scandal, only the names at the top. For me, life didn't change dramatically on the surface. I still went to work, still drank my coffee at dawn, still ironed my shirts on Sunday. But the quiet felt cleaner. My phone no longer buzzed with tension, and my evenings were finally my own. A few weeks later, I got a call from HR saying I'd been nominated for an internal ethics award. I declined the ceremony. Recognition didn't interest me. Peace did. The final step came in the mail 2 months later, a divorce decree stamped and sealed. No alimony, no property disputes, no joint accounts left. Everything clean, simple, finished. I signed the final document at my kitchen table, the same place she'd handed me the first envelope months earlier. I used the same pen. The circle closed quietly. Afterward, I sat for a while and let the silence settle again. There was no victory in it, only clarity. She had bet her life on someone else's ambition and lost. I had kept mine anchored in patience and truth. That's not revenge. That's balance. I poured a glass of water, looked around my kitchen, and realized it finally felt like my home again, small, steady, honest. The morning after the decree arrived, I woke early, as I always did. No alarm, just habit. The sky outside was gray, the kind that turns everything into one flat shade of silence. I made coffee, sat by the window, and went over a mental checklist of everything left to finalize: transfer of utilities, joint credit card closure, and notification to HR that my emergency contact was changing. It was a short list, and that was the point. My life had been reduced to essentials. I didn't feel broken. I felt stripped down. There's a difference. When you've been through deceit, there's a quiet stage that follows, where you stop trying to make sense of motives and start rebuilding the foundation of what's still yours. For me, that foundation was work, dignity, and peace. That day, I met with Jamal at his office to sign the final settlement documents. He'd arranged everything so there were no loose threads. Monica had forfeited spousal support and any claim to the house in exchange for a clean break. She wanted out fast, likely hoping to salvage what was left of her name before the company blacklisted her. Jamal read the papers line by line, then looked up and said, "You handled this the way a man should. No public scenes, no social media nonsense, just facts." "That's rare." I said, "I'm too old for noise." He nodded. "That's why you won." After signing, I told him I didn't want to pursue charges or civil action. She'd already paid her price. "What more is there to take?" I asked. He smiled slightly. "Peace. And you already took it." Back at work, the mood toward me was different. People respected how I'd handled the situation. No gossip, no bitterness. Renee stopped by one afternoon and said, "Your report forced the company to tighten the entire vendor policy. They're even renaming the Ethics Award after this case." I said that wasn't necessary, and she replied, "It's not about recognition, Calvin. It's about standards." That mattered to me more than applause. At home, I began clearing out what was left of her things. Half-empty bottles of perfume, a few framed photos, and old clothes she'd forgotten in the closet. I packed them neatly and called her sister to come pick them up. When her sister arrived, she stood on the porch, awkward, quiet. She said Monica was staying with a cousin in North Carolina and wasn't doing well. I didn't ask for details. I just handed her the boxes and said, "I hope she finds her peace." That was the truth. I didn't wish her pain, just distance. In the evenings, I found myself walking more. There's a park 2 blocks from my street with a small lake, and I'd make 2 laps before sunset. It helped clear my head. One evening, Pastor Will joined me. He'd heard what happened from Jamal. He didn't offer sympathy or scripture at first, just walked beside me, hands behind his back, the way older men do when words aren't needed. After a few minutes, he said, "You kept your integrity when everything around you fell apart. That's rare, son." I said, "It didn't feel noble. It felt necessary." He nodded. "That's the same thing." We walked in silence again until he said, "Forgiveness isn't a favor you give the other person. It's a tool to unhook yourself." I said, "I'm not angry." He replied, "Then you've already forgiven." It stayed with me, the idea that forgiveness didn't need ceremony. It could just be the quiet decision not to carry someone else's mistake any further. Over the next few weeks, the investigation into Rourke Supply concluded. A federal inquiry was opened for contract fraud, and several executives were named. Evan Rourke himself was charged with wire fraud and falsification of bid data. He'd built his company on stolen templates, insider connections, and manipulation. It wasn't just my department he'd targeted, several others across the state had reported similar leaks. His fall was public. News stations ran segments about the vendor integrity scandal. I watched one broadcast late one night and saw his photo flash across the screen. Monica's name wasn't mentioned. I was glad for that. Some mistakes don't need a permanent record. At work, the board requested I join a review committee for future vendor compliance. It was a promotion in everything but title, more pay, more trust. I accepted. Not because I wanted the recognition, but because it allowed me to build something stronger in the place that had been compromised. Systems protect people, but only when the people inside them care enough to enforce truth. Outside of work, I kept things simple. Church on Sundays, groceries on Saturdays, quiet dinners alone. I found comfort in silence again. The house didn't echo anymore, it breathed. I'd play jazz while I cooked, something soft, Coltrane or Bill Evans, and read before bed. There was no loneliness in that. Just peace. One evening, around a month after the divorce, I got an unexpected text. It was from Monica. I know you don't owe me anything, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. I ruined everything. You didn't deserve that. I read it twice and didn't respond immediately. I wasn't sure what she wanted, closure or forgiveness, but either way, I had nothing left to give beyond the truth. I waited a day, then replied. I hope you learn from it. Take care of yourself. That was the last message I ever sent her. Jamal said later that she'd taken a job out of state, something unrelated to corporate finance. I didn't ask where. Some stories don't need an epilogue. Meanwhile, I began small repairs around the house, painting, tightening cabinet hinges, restaining the porch steps. Simple work, but grounding. When you've been through betrayal, physical labor steadies your hands. It gives your mind something solid to hold. I also started mentoring a few younger men at work who'd gone through messy divorces or personal losses. They'd stop by my office after hours, close the door, and just talk. I'd tell them what I'd learned. You can't control betrayal, but you can control how cleanly you walk away from it. They listened. Sometimes they'd thank me, other times, they'd just sit quietly and breathe. I understood that silence. By the third month, I'd stopped thinking about the past every morning. It was no longer the first thing that came to mind when I woke. That's how healing really begins, not with grand declarations, but with absence. The noise fades, and one day you realize you don't need to check your phone for messages that no longer come. Financially, I was fine. I had no debt, steady work, and the house was mine outright. The only thing left was to update the beneficiary on my life insurance policy. I listed my niece. She'd always been like a daughter to me. She called one Sunday to thank me, not knowing why I'd done it, just saying she loved me. It reminded me that family doesn't always come from blood or marriage. Sometimes it's built quietly, through trust and consistency. That weekend, Pastor will ask me to speak briefly at the men's fellowship about handling adversity. I hesitated but agreed. Standing there, looking at those familiar faces, I said, when life tests you, the loudest thing you can do is stay calm. The world expects noise, anger, shouting, chaos. But calm exposes the truth faster than rage ever could. They nodded. Some smiled. One man clapped softly. That was enough. Later, walking back to my truck, I thought about how far I'd come in such a short time. 6 months earlier, I'd been a husband trying to save a marriage already gone. Now I was a man who'd learned that peace doesn't require anyone's permission. You just decide to stop negotiating for it. That night, I stood in the doorway of my home, looked around, and realized something simple but important. The same table where betrayal happened was now the place where truth lived. I didn't replace it. I didn't need to. It had seen both sides of my life, the breakdown and the rebuild. That made it part of the story. Before bed, I opened my notebook and wrote a final line beneath all the old entries. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers and then walks out the door. Then I closed the book, turned off the light, and slept better than I had in years. The investigation into Rourke Supply went public in early spring. It started with a local business journal article, the kind that usually goes unnoticed unless you work in logistics or accounting. But this one spread fast. The headline read, Vendor Fraud Scandal Shakes Regional Supply Network. My company was listed as one of several that had reported irregular bidding activity. The article didn't name individual employees, but it did mention that a whistleblower within the logistics industry had triggered the review that led to Rourke Supply's collapse. Inside the company, people knew it was me. In the following weeks, investigators released more details. Evan Rourke had been charged with conspiracy, document forgery, and data misappropriation. Several of his partners turned on him to avoid prosecution. They told the truth because it finally cost less than the lie. The news ran interviews with former clients and employees describing how Evan manipulated everyone, how he promised them growth while feeding off stolen information. I watched one interview after dinner, sitting in the same chair where Monica used to eat her late-night takeout. The reporter mentioned that Rourke's personal assistant had been involved in transmitting internal documents between companies. They didn't mention her name, but anyone who knew her could read between the lines. The next day, HR called me in to sit with a few board members. They wanted to thank me in person for preventing greater losses. I told them I just did my job. One executive, a man I'd worked under for years, said, "You didn't just do your job, Calvin. You protected the company when others were too scared to act." I appreciated the gesture, but I didn't stay for the photographs or the press memo they planned to release. I've never liked spotlights. I told them the truth didn't need my face on it. A week later, I attended a public hearing held downtown. Rourke's legal team tried to delay the proceedings, but the evidence was airtight. I sat quietly near the back, out of sight. Evan walked in wearing a dark suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, but he looked smaller than before, tired, hollow. He glanced around the courtroom, maybe hoping to see familiar faces. Monica wasn't there. Her name had been removed from the case by then, labeled a cooperating witness. I didn't feel pity or anger. I felt closure. When the judge read the charges and Evan stood to respond, he didn't deny anything. He simply said, "I made mistakes." The courtroom was silent. That's how lies end, not with shouting, but with quiet acceptance that the truth has already done its work. After the hearing, I walked out into the cool air. Reporters crowded the entrance, cameras flashing, microphones chasing statements. None of them recognized me. I passed through the crowd unnoticed, and that was exactly how I wanted it. Behind me, I heard one reporter say, "The whistleblower declined to comment." I smiled faintly. They didn't know I'd just walked by. That night, Jamal called. "I saw the hearing on TV," he said. "You did right staying in the background. Public attention fades, but your peace stays." I wasn't built for headlines, I told him. He laughed. "No, you were built for consistency. That's rare these days." Within a month, the entire Rourke operation folded. Their offices were seized, their accounts frozen, and their reputation destroyed. Other companies that had done business with them sent internal memos reminding employees about compliance and integrity. My own company issued a brief statement praising the professional who identified the breach and acted with discretion. That line meant more to me than any award. A few weeks later, I ran into one of Monica's former coworkers at a grocery store. She recognized me and said, "I just wanted to tell you, you handled everything with more grace than most people would have." I thanked her, wished her well, and walked away. I didn't ask about Monica. I didn't need to know where she'd gone. Her part of the story was finished. The following Sunday, Pastor Will spoke about truth during his sermon. He said, "When you plant integrity, it may take time to grow, but it never rots." I sat in the third pew, listening quietly. He didn't mention me by name, but I knew he was talking about what had happened. After service, a few church members shook my hand. One older woman said, "You remind me that calm men still exist." That might have been the highest compliment I've ever received. The public story ended there, with a company gone, a marriage closed, and a man who simply did what was right when it mattered. But privately, that was the real consequence: peace. No chaos, no fear, no resentment, just the quiet life I'd always tried to live, finally free of lies. One night, about a month later, I opened my laptop to clear old files. Buried in a folder marked personal, I found the first draft of the proposal that had started it all. I opened it, read the first line, and remembered how proud I'd been when I wrote it. Then I deleted it. The past didn't need storage anymore. When people ask me how I stayed calm through it all, I tell them the truth: you don't win by shouting. You win by being the only one who doesn't need to. By the time spring turned to summer, life had gone back to something I hadn't felt in a long time: normal. Not the kind of normal where everything feels bright and easy, but the kind that runs on steady rhythm. I woke up early, fixed breakfast, went to work, came home to a quiet house that was finally mine again. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I let it stay. Silence, I'd learned, isn't emptiness, it's recovery. Every part of my life that had once revolved around reaction, checking texts, avoiding arguments, explaining myself, was gone. What replaced it was small, solid, dependable. I watered the front lawn on Sundays, fixed the leaky faucet, repaired the gate. The work steadied me. Hands busy, mind calm. At work, people treated me with a quiet respect that wasn't there before. Not hero worship, just acknowledgement. They saw that I kept my dignity when it would have been easier to lose it. Younger supervisors began stopping by my office, asking for advice. Not about logistics, but about life: how to stay married, how to deal with disappointment, how to know when to walk away. I told them what I'd learned the hard way: if someone shows you that truth isn't part of their language, believe them the first time. Renee visited one afternoon with a stack of revised policies for vendor security. She said, "You know, your case changed how this company handles trust." I said I didn't set out to change anything. She smiled. That's usually how change works. The ones who aren't looking for it make it happen. Outside the office, I started spending more time at the community center down the road. They ran a mentorship program for young men just starting in trades: electricians, mechanics, warehouse operators. Jamal had suggested I volunteer, and it turned out to be one of the best decisions I'd made in years. Those young guys reminded me of who I used to be: hungry to work, still believing effort would always be rewarded fairly. I told them it often isn't, but that doesn't excuse you from doing your part right. One kid, maybe 20, asked, "So you don't ever get tired of doing the right thing?" I told him, "Of course I do. But doing the wrong thing costs more." He nodded, quiet, thinking it over. That felt like progress. By July, I'd finished paying off the mortgage. I didn't celebrate. I just went to the bank, signed the papers, and walked out lighter. Later that evening, I drove to the park, sat by the lake, and let the sound of the water settle my thoughts. For the first time in years, I didn't feel watched or judged or doubted. I just existed. Sometimes I'd catch myself wondering where Monica had ended up, but the thought never stayed long. Not out of anger, just lack of relevance. Her chapter had closed completely. There was no bitterness left, only understanding. People break themselves chasing the version of success that others promised them. She'd learned that lesson the hard way. In late summer, Pastor will ask me to share a brief reflection at church during a service about resilience. I stood at the podium, looked at the congregation, and said, "Sometimes survival looks like silence. Sometimes strength means not answering every insult or proving every point. Truth has a strange patience; it waits for noise to stop before it speaks." When I stepped down, a man about my age shook my hand and said, "I needed to hear that. My daughter's going through something similar." I told him what I tell everyone now: stay calm, stay decent, and let the truth handle its own timing. By fall, I had developed a rhythm that didn't need repair. I'd stopped checking the news about Rourke. Evan's sentencing came and went. I didn't read the article, though Jamal told me he'd received 5 years. Justice doesn't always look satisfying; sometimes it's just paperwork in a file. What mattered was that I no longer carried any of it. I'd moved from survival to living again. I started cooking real meals: grilled salmon, collard greens, baked cornbread. I even hosted Jamal and Pastor Will for dinner one evening. They sat at the same dining table where everything had started. We talked about sports, faith, and how peace doesn't always announce itself; it just shows up and stays if you let it. When they left, I sat back down alone, looked at the empty plates, and smiled a little. The table had seen betrayal, but it had also seen rebuilding. I didn't need to replace it. I'd earned the right to sit there without pain. That night, I wrote one last note in my journal before turning in. You can't always stop betrayal, but you can decide how cleanly you walk away from it. Dignity doesn't erase pain, it outlives it. Then I closed the book, turned off the light, and went to sleep with a clear head. If you've made it this far, you already know the truth of what I'm about to say. When someone betrays you, it doesn't just break your heart, it tries to rewrite who you are. The anger, the shame, the confusion, they'll all push you to react fast, to fight loud. But if there's one thing I learned, it's that noise never saves you. Stillness does. I didn't win because I caught my wife cheating or because her boss got what was coming. I won because I never let their choices change my character. Every man reaches a point where he has to decide, do I want revenge or do I want peace? I chose peace, and it cost nothing I wasn't ready to lose. Some nights, I still sit at that same table, the one where she slid those divorce papers across. The light hits it different now. No ghosts left, no bitterness. Just quiet. That's what dignity sounds like when it stops trying to explain itself. People ask me sometimes, Calvin, would you take her back if you could? And I tell them, you can't take back what was never truly yours. If you're watching this and you're going through your own kind of betrayal, hear me clearly. You don't need to destroy the person who hurt you. Just stop protecting them. Tell the truth, stand on it, and then move forward.